Table 4 needs water, grandfather. The CEO's fiancé snapped at me during the gala. I poured it quietly. 5 minutes later, a $20 billion investor walked in, ignored the CEO, and hugged me. Ready to buy them out, partner, she whispered. That night, she dropped her glass. I am Jerry, and for 20 years, I have been the invisible man. I have stood at the perimeter of hundreds of events in this gilded ballroom, a space that always smells faintly of white lilies and corporate tax evasion. To the entitled figures who glide through this club, the tech bros, the venture capitalists, the entitled spasses, I am simply staff. I have no name, only a function, more ice. Check the seating chart, find the misplaced coat. I am the wallpaper in a black polyester vest, but being invisible has its perks. When people believe they are alone, they stop performing. I know exactly which board members are planning a hostile merger based on where they place their coffee cups. I have seen secrets whispered into cell phones that would get 3 different lawyers fired. I know who is weeping in the supply closet because their father never called them a success. I know where the skeletons are buried because I was often the one asked to quietly tidy up the shovel. My expertise was not just in logistics, it was in watching. Tonight, the club air was particularly thick with self-importance. Tonight was supposed to be the coronation of Ethan Blake. I remember when Blake was just a sweaty, nervous kid 10 years ago, pitching his nebulous concept, some app doing something with artificial intelligence and logistics, in the tiny back room of this very establishment. He was shaking so hard he spilled water all over himself. I was the one who gave him a clean towel and told him, "Hold your head up, son. They can smell fear before they smell cheap cologne." Now he's the cover boy for Forbes magazine. The application still does something I do not pretend to understand, but the valuation I grasp perfectly, $3 billion. The event tonight, the Galactic Gala, was his official launch. The night he cemented his status as a titan of industry. And he was doing it right here at the Gilded Palm, the same place I've managed the floor of since before he could drive. Money acts like a magnifying glass for a person's worst traits, and Blake's humility had evaporated entirely. He used to be polite. Now he snaps his fingers at waiters and returns plates because they lack aggressiveness. I was adjusting the place settings at table 1, the alpha table, ensuring the golden chargers and calligraphy cards were millimeter perfect. For me, perfection isn't a target. It's the fundamental baseline for my survival in this world. Jerry. The voice boomed across the empty ballroom, shattering the silence. It wasn't a greeting, it was a harsh, sharp summons. I straightened my vest, feeling the familiar, faint click in my knees that only I could feel. I turned to see Blake striding toward me in a midnight blue tuxedo that probably cost $10,000, looking sleek and pre-packaged. Trailing him was Trixie, his fiancée of 3 months. She was 24, an influencer who made a living complaining about airline food, wearing a sequin dress that defied multiple laws of engineering. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice level, the professional mask sliding smoothly into place. "Is everything to your satisfaction? The ambient lighting is set, and the kitchen is on course for the first course at 7:30. Blake didn't look up from his phone. "The lighting is fine, Jerry. It's the vibe. It feels stale." "Stale," Trixie chimed in, chewing a piece of bubblegum with shocking force. "It feels old. Like a nursing home prom, Blakey. We should have done this in a warehouse." "It's lobster bisque for the 3rd course, Miss Trixie," I informed her calmly. "Gross," she replied, wrinkling her surgically enhanced nose. "Anyway, Blakey, look at him." She pointed a claw-like finger at me. Blake finally glanced up, squinting as if trying to recall what I was. "What about him?" "Is just standing there in that black suit. He looks like a funeral director," Trixie whined. "It's bringing down the energy. Can't we get, like, models to serve the champagne? Or at least someone who doesn't look like they remember the moon landing?" A cold prickle of heat spread across my neck. I am 55, in excellent shape from hauling banquet tables and running a tight floor, and I look damn good for it. But the disrespect was personal and professional. Blake sighed, the sound of a CEO tired of managing details he deemed beneath him. "Jerry, she has a point. The optics are important tonight. We have investors coming. Serious money. We need the aesthetic to match the valuation. I am the floor manager, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dropping a degree. "I don't serve champagne. I direct the service. I ensure the timing is precise. I make sure your serious money doesn't wait more than 30 seconds for a drink. Yeah. Blake waved his hand, dismissing my entire profession. But we're pivoting, right? Look, technically you're not even on the club payroll for this event. I rented the hall and hired external catering staff. You're just here as what did we call it? Legacy support. The words were bitter, tasting like bile and betrayal. Right, I repeated. So, Trixie has an idea, Blake continued, checking his reflection in a soup spoon. Just to spruce things up. A little retro charm. Irony. The kids love irony. I have a uniform for you, Trixie squealed, pulling a crumpled black polyester rag from her assistant's bag. It was a cheap, French-made costume, short skirt, white lace trim, and a ridiculous white ruffled headband. Vintage chic, she beamed. You put this on and carry a tray. It'll be like a commentary on service, you know. Ironic servitude. I stared at the hideous costume in my hand. I looked at Blake. He offered nothing, no recognition of the times I had covered for him. The times I had smoothed over his drunken rants. The time I had literally sewn a button on his jacket 5 minutes before his first IPO meeting. I was just a prop. Don't be difficult, Blake said, finally meeting my eyes. If you want the bonus we discussed for managing the logistics, you play the part. Team player, right, team player, I whispered. Great. Trixie shoved the costume into my hands. Go change. Guests start arriving in an hour. And try to look, I don't know, festive. Maybe some red lipstick. You look kind of washed out. They turned and walked away. I stood there, clutching the cheap costume in the empty, air-conditioned silence. I looked down at table 1, Blake's seat. My hand went to my pocket and felt the cool, hard glass of my phone. I pulled it out. I had a message drafted, one I had kept saved for 5 years. I had been hesitant to send it, thinking perhaps Blake still had a decent core. I looked at the costume. The polyester felt like an insult woven from synthetic fibers. I opened the message. It was addressed to a sequence of digits I had memorized long ago. I deleted the hesitant draft. Instead, I typed confirmed 8:15 p.m. sharp. Bring the sledgehammer. I hit send. Then I walked toward the staff locker room to put on the damn dress. If they wanted a show, I was going to give them a show. They just didn't know I was writing the third act. Yars, the heavy oak door of the service entrance clicked shut behind me, isolating me in the tired, fluorescent light of the staff corridor. I was clutching the synthetic rag, the maid costume, knowing I had to execute the plan I'd always kept as a backup, the revenge I had never truly believed I would need to send into motion. The locker room smelled exactly as it always did, a heavy mixture of pine bleach, damp towels, and tired feet. The sanctuary of the invisible class. I pulled off my perfectly pressed black suit and slowly put on the dress Trixie had given me. It was cheap polyester, tight in the chest, and the skirt hit ludicrously high above the knee. I tugged the zipper, it snagged immediately, then ripped a small, faint tear in the side seam. Perfect, I thought, let it be ragged. I fitted the ruffled white headband onto my temples. The cheap plastic teeth dug into my scalp immediately. I looked in the chipped mirror. I looked like a mockery. I looked like what they wanted me to look like. Mr. Jerry, why are you wearing that? I turned. It was Miguel, the head bartender, polishing a wine glass with excessive force. He's a good man, supports 3 children and his mother-in-law on a bartender's wage. He stared at me with an expression of horror mixed with pity. You are the floor manager. You wear the suit. Not tonight, Miguel, I said, reaching for my small kit. Trixie had suggested red lipstick. I applied the shade, a bright, aggressive color called Siren. The stain on the tissue I blotted with looked like blood. Tonight, I'm legacy support. Apparently, this is what legacy looks like now. Miguel frowned, setting the glass down with a heavy, deliberate clink. That man, Blake, he has no honor. After everything you did for him. I remember when he couldn't pay the rental fee for the small conference room. You waived the deposit. You told management it was a clerical error. I know, Miguel, I said, smoothing the ridiculous white apron. I felt the familiar weight of the phone in the suit pants I was holding. I know. You should leave, Miguel said fiercely. Walk out. Let them manage the logistics. See how they handle it when the ice melts and the shrimp turns gray. No, I said, turning back to him, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. They didn't look washed out anymore, they looked like flint. If I leave, they win. If I leave, I'm just the old man who couldn't hack the new vibe. Besides, I have a table to serve. I pulled the phone from my pocket and checked the screen. The text I had sent was confirmed. The money, the sledgehammer, was on the way. A grim, hard smile touched my lips. Miguel, I said, tonight is going to be a little different. When the time comes, just keep pouring. No matter what happens out there, just keep pouring. He looked confused, but he nodded slowly. I trust you, Mr. Jerry. I walked out of the locker room and into the noise of the prep kitchen. The clatter of pans and the hiss of steamers was a roar. This was my engine room. Every chef, every busboy, every dishwasher knew me. As I walked past, conversation stopped dead. They saw the ridiculous costume, the humiliation. Keep working, I snapped, but not unkindly. The lobster bisque isn't going to ladle itself. Let's go, people. We have a timeline. They scrambled back to work, but the energy had shifted. They were angry for me, and that was good. Anger is a more potent fuel than fear. I pushed through the swinging doors and back into the main ballroom. The party was beginning to trickle in. Blake and Trixie were posing by the entrance. Trixie shrieked, "Oh my God, it's perfect," and immediately grabbed her phone and snapped a picture of me without asking. I heard the tap, tap, tap of her typing fingers. Caption, "Even the help is vintage tonight." Blake chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "You look spirited, Jerry." "Good sport." He waved me off. "Table 4 needs water glasses refreshed. Just mingle. Offer hors d'oeuvres. Look busy and try not to frown. It wrinkles your face." I walked away before I could say something that would get me fired 5 minutes before the coup. I took my silver tray of champagne flutes and began to circulate. I was the invisible man in a ridiculous costume, and that was a strange kind of power. They thought I was a prop, a joke. They assumed I was deaf, too. I moved through the crowd, offering a glass here, a napkin there. I listened. "The Q3 numbers are inflated." A man in a velvet suit whispered near the seafood tower. "Blake is counting projected subscriptions as realized revenue. It's a house of cards." I heard the SEC is sniffing around. His companion replied, stuffing a crab cake into his mouth. "But if the buyout goes through tonight, it won't matter. He'll cash out and it'll be someone else's problem." "Who's the buyer?" "Unknown. Some private equity firm from New York. Shadow money." I smiled tightly. Not shadow money, I thought smart money. The intelligence I was gathering confirmed everything I suspected about Blake's reckless bookkeeping. I adjusted the ridiculous headband. The plastic teeth were really digging in now. Pain keeps you sharp. I continued to circulate, using my professional position to move in close. I overheard specifics. A $20 million overage hidden in the logistics division. The exact flaw in their routing system that I had secretly corrected 3 years ago, just by adjusting a vendor list. Blake didn't even know he had a logistics problem until it was gone. This information, my information, was the core of the hostile takeover. 7:40, 5 p.m., 15 minutes until the critical time. The party was a pressure cooker of humidity and ego, a financial bubble about to burst. I looked across the room at Blake, who was raising a glass, toasting his own reflection. "Enjoy it, kid. That champagne is about to go flat." The intelligence was complete. The time was set. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom was a high-pressure zone, packed with 300 people whose collective self-importance was physically pushing the oxygen out of the air. The DJ was playing something that sounded like robots in a panic attack, vibrating the floorboards and shaking the wine glasses. My tray was lighter now, filled with empty flutes. I moved with the familiar rhythm of the service industry: sweep left, grab the used napkin, pivot right, dodge the drunk investor nod, and fade away. "Excuse me." A young man with a neck tattoo snapped his fingers at me, his lip fillers looking painful. "Can we get some more of those spicy tuna things, and make sure they're gluten-free?" I puffed up last time. "I will check with the kitchen, sir," I said, my voice deadpan. "Don't check, just do," he instructed, rolling his eyes as he turned back to live streaming on his phone. He was explaining to his followers that the service was kind of slow. I swallowed the urge to dump the entire tray of dirty glasses into his expensive velvet blazer. I made my way toward the VIP section, tables 1 through 5. This was the eye of the storm. Blake sat at table 1, flanked by potential investors and board members, radiating anxiety. Trixie was perched literally on his lap, feeding him grapes like a low-budget emperor. "Babe, stop." Blake laughed. but he didn't push her away. He looked genuinely stressed, his eyes darting across the room. He was waiting for something, or someone. Where are they? I heard him hiss to his CFO, a frantic little man named Gary. The lawyer said 8 o'clock. Traffic maybe. It's Miami, Blake. Gary squeaked. Traffic is chaos. I need them here before the keynote speech. Blake snapped. We need the LO I signed before I go on stage. If I announce the valuation without the signature, and they back out, they won't back out, Gary said, though he clearly did not sound convinced. I cleared a plate of half-eaten filet mignon from in front of them. Blake didn't even notice I was there. He was too busy vibrating with panic. He needed the shadow money to arrive and sign the deal that would get him his cash out before his company's internal rot was exposed. Then, chaos erupted at table 4, the influencer table, where Trixie's friends were drunk and loud. Hey, maid. The voice cut through the music. It was Trixie. She was standing up at table 1, shouting across the VIP gap to table 4, but she was pointing straight at me. The DJ transitioning tracks had dipped the music volume just enough to make her voice agonizingly loud. Hey, table 4 needs water. I've grandfather. Heads turned across the ballroom. The board members at table 1 stopped mid-sip. The investors paused their conversation. Even the DJ seemed to falter, letting the silence hang heavy. Grandfather. The word hung in the air like a punchline. I froze. My hands tightened on the silver tray, the metal biting into my skin. Trixie giggled, looking around for validation from the audience. He's so deaf. Hello, water? Chop, chop. She clapped her hands sharp and dismissive like summoning a dog. Blake laughed a nervous, permissive chuckle. Yeah, Jerry. Let's keep the hydration up. Important guests. I turned slowly. I looked at Trixie. She was smirking, her eyes glinting with malice. She wanted me to snap, to yell, so she could post the boomer meltdown and say she told him so. I took a deep, steady breath, the technique I'd learned decades ago dealing with panicked brides and drunken grooms. I walked to the service station. I picked up a crystal pitcher of ice water. It felt heavy and cold in my hand. I walked to table 4. The influencers were snickering, phones discreetly recording. Oh, ice. One guy with a neon neck tattoo said, holding out his glass without looking at me. Ice bruises the spirit of the water. Of course, I said, my voice smooth and low. I poured the water. The stream was perfect, not a single drop spilled. Thank you, grandfather, a girl with pink hair chirped. I finished pouring. I straightened up and looked across the gap at Trixie. I did not scowl. I smiled, a terrifyingly calm, grandfatherly smile that didn't reach my eyes. Is there anything else? Miss Trixie. I called out, my voice projecting perfectly over the low lull in the music. Decades of ballroom management means I know exactly how to throw my voice so it reaches the back wall without shouting. Perhaps a bib. You seem to have dropped some sauce on your chin. Trixie's hand flew to her face. There was nothing there. Table 1 snickered. She flushed a violent red. Your water is served, I said. Enjoy. I turned and walked away. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my steps were steady. I checked my watch, 8:14 p.m. The taunt had done its work. It had pushed me past the point of no return. The humiliation was now fuel. I had endured the insult and kept my professional composure. Now the execution began. I reached the edge of the ballroom, near the heavy oak double doors that led to the main foyer. Just as the clock on the wall swept past the 8:15 p.m. sharp, I was wearing a ridiculous costume, but my mind was laser-focused on the execution. Miguel stood by the doors, looking anxious. Mr. Jerry, he whispered, his eyes wide. There is a situation outside. Security is trying to stop someone. They say only those on the list. Let them in, Miguel, I said softly. But Mr. Sterling said, Miguel. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder. He looked at me, at the silly ruffles on my head, and then at my eyes. He nodded once, understanding the shift in command. He signaled the doorman. The massive double doors groaned open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. The noise of the party, the thumping bass, the loud chatter, all seemed to recede into a low background hum. When real money enters a room, it doesn't shout, it whispers, and everyone leans in to listen. Blake's crowd was neon noise and visible logos. The group that walked through those doors was something else entirely. It was old world. It was, we own the steel mills that built your city money. 2 men in charcoal suits entered first. Anya Carril's personal security detail. They moved like Secret Service agents clearing a perimeter. Then came three lawyers carrying leather briefcases that looked heavy enough to hold bodies. And then Anya herself. Anya Corral is 62 years old, wears her silver hair in a sharp, intimidating bob, and moves with an authority that silence enforces. She was wearing an impeccably tailored cream-colored pantsuit. No sequins, no fanfare. Just fabric that screamed wealth. She walked with a cane, a beautiful antique piece, not because she needed it, but because it made a fantastic weapon. The room didn't just go quiet, it froze. The DJ, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, actually faded the music out completely. As that, someone whispered near me, "Is that the Corral Group?" No way. Anya Corral doesn't leave Manhattan. Blake stood up at table 1. His face went instantly from flush with arrogance to stark white. He buttoned his jacket with visibly trembling fingers. This was it, the shadow money. He believed she was here to bow down to his genius. And Blake shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he put on his best visionary CEO grin. He spread his arms wide, starting to walk toward her. "You made it. We were just getting worried. Welcome to the future." He moved to intercept her in the center of the dance floor, positioning himself perfectly for the media capture. The young king and the old queen. Anya Corral didn't break stride. She walked right past him. She didn't even glance at him. It was as if he were simply a waiter offering a tray of stale crackers. The wind of her passing actually ruffled his expensive tuxedo jacket. Blake froze, his arms still wide open, hugging empty air. He looked like a mime whose invisible box had just collapsed around him. "Anya," he croaked, turning around quickly. "The VIP table is this way." Anya kept walking. Her eyes were locked on one point in the room, me. I was standing by the service station, clutching my empty tray against my chest like a shield, wearing the polyester costume that smelled faintly of factory chemicals and shame. I wanted to sink into the floor, but I held my ground. Anya stopped 3 feet in front of me. The ballroom was utterly silent. You could hear the ice melting in the bar buckets. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering briefly on the ruffled headband, the apron, and the 2 bright red lipstick. Her expression was utterly unreadable. Then a slow, wolfish smile spread across her face. "Jerry," she said. Her voice was low and gravelly, yet carried effortlessly to the back of the room without a microphone. "I see you dressed for the slaughter." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Evening, Anya. You're late. Traffic on the bridge." I had to stop to pick up the check. She dismissed with a wave of her hand. She stepped forward and did something that made the entire room gasp. She hugged me. Not a polite, society air kiss, but a real, solid embrace crushing my cheap polyester against her cashmere. She smelled of rain and expensive tobacco. "It's good to see you, my friend," she whispered in my ear. "You too?" I choked out. She pulled back, keeping her hands firmly on my shoulders, and turned me to face the room, to face Blake, who was standing there with his mouth opening and closing like a fish, to face Trixie, who was holding her champagne glass halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with total confusion. Anya looked at Blake, then back to me. She spoke clearly, loud enough for every investor, influencer, and buzzboy to hear. "We reviewed the diligence you sent over, Jerry. The numbers on the logistics side were illuminating." She paused for maximum effect. "Ready to buy them out, partner." Anya's hands remained on my shoulders, the weight of her touch grounding me. The word partner hung in the thick silence, immediately replacing the sting of grandfather. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting for a cue. Trixie's hand went limp. Crash. Her champagne flute hit the marble floor, the sound impossibly loud, like a single gunshot. Shards of crystal skittered across the dance floor, and champagne foamed around her expensive heels. Nobody moved to clean it up. Anya kept her eyes locked on mine. "Ready to buy them out, partner," she repeated, a hint of steel beneath the question. I took a deep breath. My hands, which had been gripping the empty service tray, relaxed. I let the silver tray fall. It hit the floor with a loud clang that echoed the sound of Trixie's broken glass. I reached up and pulled off the ridiculous ruffled headband, tossing it onto the floor. I untied the white apron and let it drop. Anya motioned to one of her lawyers, a stern woman in a precisely tailored suit. The lawyer stepped forward, holding out a black silk tuxedo blazer. I slipped my arms into the jacket. It was heavy and smooth, and it fit perfectly, a sudden armor replacing the synthetic fibers of the costume. I looked at Blake. He was still frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "What is this?" He finally managed to croak. This is highly inappropriate. "Anya, this woman, this man is staff. He's a waiter. He's wearing a costume, for God's sake." Anya turned to him slowly, leaning slightly on her cane. She looked at him with the kind of clinical pity one reserves for a failed experiment. "He's staff." Anya repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "Blake, this man has been running this room since you were playing video games in your mother's basement. He knows more about your operational overhead than your CFO does." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Gary, the frantic little CFO, who instantly turned a sickly shade of gray-green. "Gary here has been cooking the books on the logistics side, hiding shipping costs in marketing. Jerry caught it 3 years ago. He just didn't say anything because he was waiting for me."
"That's a lie!"
Blake shouted, but his voice wavered, lacking its usual CEO certainty. I stepped forward, the silk blazer giving me a sudden, unexpected height. "It's on page 40. 5 of the ledger, Blake, under miscellaneous outreach. You were bleeding $2 million a quarter on inefficient routing." I paused, letting the numbers sink in. "I fixed the routes in 2019 just by reorganizing the vendor manifest. I saved this company $6 million while pouring your coffee." Blake stared at me, dumbfounded. "You fixed the routes?" "I read the manifests while I polished the silverware," I said simply. "It wasn't hard. You just weren't looking?" Anya smiled. "That's why I'm here, Blake. I don't invest in algorithms. I invest in operators, and Jerry is the best operator in Florida." In my memory, a flash of 5 years ago appeared Anya sitting defeated at the bar after a disastrous charity event. I had slid her a napkin with 3 numbers on it: the best wood, fired pizza place that owed me a favor, a jazz band that played for bourbon, and the address of the organizer who had embezzled the funds. "Who are you?" she had asked. "Just the one who watches," I replied. "She made the calls, saved the night, and gave me her card. When you are tired of watching," she said, "call me. Play the game for real." Now, the board members were doing the rapid mental math. One of them, a heavy-set man named Jenkins, whom I knew was cheating on his taxes, stepped away from table 1. "Blake," Jenkins said, his voice loud and shaky. I think we should hear what Miss Carryle has to say." At 2 o'clock in the morning, Jenkins. Blake sputtered, utterly losing control.
"She's a waiter."
"She's the incoming majority shareholder." Jenkins corrected himself, smoothing his tie. He looked at me, giving a stiff, terrified nod. "Jerry, I always said the service here was impeccable." "Cut the crap, Jenkins?" I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You tip 10% and you try to expense your escorts as consultants. We'll talk about your board seat later." Jenkins paled and retreated. Another board member, a woman who had ignored me for a decade, suddenly found her smile. "Jerry, darling, I didn't realize you were involved on a strategic level." "There's a lot you didn't realize, Susan," I said. The tide had turned completely. They weren't looking at Blake anymore, the figurehead. They were looking at the man with the pen, the one who actually understood the ledger. With the board members now awkwardly attempting to align themselves with the incoming power, the confrontation shifted back to the source of the evening's drama. Trixie, however, wasn't done. She was trembling with rage, stomping across the shards of her broken champagne glass. "This is a prank," she shrieked, her voice high and panicked. "It's a prank show. Where are the cameras? You can't just buy a company at a party. That's illegal or something." "It's a tender offer, my dear," Anya said smoothly, leaning on her cane. "It's already been filed with the SEC as of, let me check my watch, 5 minutes ago. The board just has to accept it. And considering the stock is about to tank, once the audit comes out, they will." Blake looked down at his phone, likely receiving the first news notification. His shoulders slumped. The manufactured arrogance drained out of him, leaving just a scared boy in a $10,000 tuxedo. "Jerry," he whispered, his eyes wet. "Why?" "Because you forgot who fed you," I said, "and you called me grandfather." Blake looked around the room. The silence was heavy, suffocating. The tech bros were nervously checking their phones, pretending to text, edging toward the exits. The party was dead. The wake had begun. "You can't do this," Blake pleaded, his voice gaining a desperate, frantic edge. "This is my company, my vision. You You move plates, Jerry. You don't know the first thing about synergy or scalability. Synergy. I laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. Blake, I manage a room of 300 drunk narcissists every weekend and make them feel like royalty. That is synergy. I coordinate kitchen timing, valet logistics, vendor disputes, and crisis management simultaneously while remembering that Mrs. Vanderbilt is allergic to strawberries. That is scalability. I took a step closer to him, my movement sharp in the silk blazer. You built an app that helps companies ship boxes. I built a network of people who actually get the job done. You were doing TED Talks. I was listening to your suppliers complain that you hadn't paid them in 90 days.
That's cash flow management?
Blake protested. That's bankruptcy fraud. Anya corrected from behind me. And the DOJ is gonna love the emails Jerry saved. Blake flinched as if slapped. You saved emails. I cleaned your office, Blake, I said. I emptied your trash. I saw what you shredded. I saw what you forgot to shred because you were too busy picking out engagement rings. I looked at Trixie. She was staring at Blake with horror, not because he was in trouble, but because she had finally grasped the implications of his financial downfall. You're broke, Trixie whispered. The venom in her voice was pure acid. Blakey.
Tell me you're not broke. It's a liquidity issue.
Blake shouted, sweating profusely now. It's temporary once the IPO hits. There is no IPO, I said calmly. Not for you. Anya is buying the debt. We're taking the assets. You're getting a golden parachute, Blake. But it's full of holes. This is insane, Blake muttered, running a hand through his gelled hair. I'm the CEO. You can't replace the founder. Watch me, I said. I turned to the remaining crowd, projecting my voice again. Ladies and gentlemen, the bar is closed. A collective groan went through the room. I waited a beat. However, I continued. For those interested in the future of Ironwood Logistics under new management, there is a reserve of 1940. 2 Don Julio in the cellar that I've been saving for a special occasion. And since I now own the cellar, I looked at Miguel, the head bartender. Open it up, Miguel. On the house. A tentative cheer went up, instantly shifting the loyalty of the crowd to the person providing the better liquor. Blake stood alone in the center of the dance floor. The spotlight that had been following him seemed to waver, then drift, leaving him in the shadows. I made you, he hissed at me, his eyes wet. I let you stay on. I gave you a job when you were just an old relic. You didn't give me a job, Blake, I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. You gave me a front row seat to your funeral, and you made me wear a maid costume to it. I reached into the silk blazer and unclipped the name tag from the suit I was wearing underneath, the one that said, Jerry Staff. I tossed it onto his chest. It bounced off his tuxedo lapel and clattered to the floor. You can keep that.
Souvenir? I'm calling security.
Trixie shrieked, suddenly finding her voice again. This is harassment.
Get him out of here!
She looked around wildly for the bouncers. 2 large men in black suits stepped forward. Trixie pointed frantically at me. Throw him out! The bouncers looked at Trixie, then at me. One of them, a man named Tiny who I helped get dental insurance last year, crossed his arms. Sorry, Miss Trixie. Mr. Jerry says you got to leave. Trixie's jaw dropped. Excuse me? You heard the man? I said. And take your boyfriend with you. He's ruining the vibe. Escort Miss Trixie to the exit, I instructed Tiny. And make sure she doesn't take the silverware.
You can't do this.
Trixie screamed as Tiny gently but firmly took her arm. Do you know who I am?
I have 3 million followers.
And I have the deed to the building, I said. Goodbye, Trixie. She was dragged out, still shouting about lawsuits and how her father would hear about this. The room went silent again. I looked over at Blake. He hadn't moved, he hadn't defended her. He was utterly broken, the expensive tuxedo now looking like a discarded shell. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and vacant. Jerry, what happens to me? You go home, Blake, I said. You sleep it off, and tomorrow morning you come to my office. We have a lot of boxes to ship, and you're going to learn how to pack them. He stared at me, confusion replacing panic. If you want to keep your minority equity, I clarified, you start at the bottom like I did. He looked down at his soft, manicured hands, then nodded a slow, defeated nod.
Okay,
he whispered. Good, I said. Anya tapped her cane on the floor. I think we're done with the theatrics. We sign. One of her lawyers opened a briefcase on table 1, right next to the congealing Filet Mignon. We have the documents here, Miss Carryle. No, I said. Anya raised an eyebrow. Not here, I said, looking around the ballroom. I'm done with this room. The acoustics are terrible and it smells like desperation. I pointed upward. We're going to the executive lounge. Blake's head snapped up. The lounge. That's private. That's keycard access only. My private collection is up there. I know, I said. I pulled a simple brass key from my pocket. It was not electronic. It was the old manual override key for the building maintenance that bypasses every newfangled lock. I have the master key. After you. I gestured to Anya. We walked toward the elevators. The remaining investors and board members, the scavengers who had stayed for the outcome, parted like the Red Sea. I felt their eyes on me. Curious, fearful, respectful. For the first time in 20 years, they weren't looking through me. They were looking at me. We stepped into the elevator, Anya, the lawyers, and myself. We left Blake and his entourage shouting incoherently at the loyal security in the lobby. The door slid shut, cutting off the noise of the party. Silence, blessed silence. You have a flair for the dramatic, Jerry. Anya chuckled as the elevator rose toward the penthouse. I learned from the best, I said. You should have seen the time I had to get a live jaguar out of the bridal suit. The elevator dinged at the penthouse level, the executive lounge. It was a space designed to intimidate dark leather, chrome flooring, and massive windows overlooking the Miami skyline. I walked straight to Blake's desk. It was a massive slab of mahogany, far too large for any actual work. I walked around it and sat in the ergonomic leather chair. It groaned slightly, adjusting to my weight. I put my feet up on the desk. My sensible orthopedic shoes looked utterly out of place against the polished wood, and I didn't care one bit. Comfortable? Anya asked, taking a seat opposite me. Needs better lumbar support, I critique, but the view is nice. The lawyers spread the papers out on the desk, reams of legal ease, purchase agreements, transfer of power. The terms are as we discussed. Anya said, her voice turning strictly business. Carryle Group takes 51%. You take 10% equity and the position of Chief Operations Officer. Blake retains a minority stake but no voting rights. A figurehead until the transition is complete. Then we buy him out for pennies. And the staff, I asked, picking up a Montblanc pen. It was heavy, weighted. Retained. Anya confirmed. With a 15% raise across the board. As you requested. And Trixie. Banned from the premises. Anya said. And her social media accounts will be hearing from our legal team if she posts so much as a pixel about tonight. I looked at the papers. Nebula Logistics. Change the name. Anya. Any ideas? I thought about the invisible work, the strength of the foundation, the deep roots of competence. Ironwood, I said. Strong, deep roots. Hard to break. Ironwood. Anya tested the word. I like it. I leaned forward. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name. Jerry. The signature was bold and sweeping. Done, I said, capping the pen. Congratulations, Anya said. You just bought a company? No, I said, standing up. I just took back the one I was already running. The deal was signed. I stood up from the mahogany desk, the new COO of Ironwood Logistics, and walked back toward the elevator. I needed to address the staff. I needed to tell Miguel he didn't have to worry about his mother-in-law's medical bills anymore. When the doors opened back onto the ballroom level, the scene had quieted. Blake was sitting on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands, weeping openly. A few former colleagues were awkwardly patting his back, while simultaneously looking for an escape route. The party was over, but the clean-up was just beginning. Anya walked up beside me on the balcony, having traded her cane for a glass of the vintage tequila. Not bad for a first day, she said. We have a lot of work to do, I replied, looking down at the crew below. The inventory system is a mess. The vendor contracts need renegotiating, and HR is a joke. That's why you're here, Anya said simply. To fix the mess the boys made. I looked down. Miguel was behind the bar, polishing a wine glass. He looked up, saw me, and stopped. He nudged the busboy next to him. They both looked up. Miguel raised his polishing cloth in a silent, powerful salute. The busboy gave a thumbs up. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the title, but the fact that we, the invisible people, had won. You know, I said to Anya, Blake wasn't entirely wrong. The lighting was a little stale. I pointed to the lighting rig. Maybe we should change the gels for the next event. Anya laughed, a low, resonant sound. For the boss, change whatever you want. I looked at the hideous French-made costume, which was still piled in the corner where I had dropped it. It was a heap of black polyester and shame. "Miguel," I called down. He looked up instantly. "Yes, boss." "Throw that maid outfit in the incinerator," I said. "And Miguel, burn the headband first." He grinned. "With pleasure, Mr. Jerry." The party wound down quickly. The vultures, the investors, realized the company wasn't dying. It was just under better management. They lined up to shake my hand. Men who had ignored me for a decade were suddenly very interested in my opinions on supply chain logistics. I navigated them with the same polite, efficient distance I used to move a tray of hot soup through a crowded floor. I was not their friend, I was their operator. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the last guest had left. I checked my phone. One new notification. It was from the bank. A deposit alert, the signing bonus. The number had so many zeros I had to count them twice. I smiled. I walked toward the exit. I did not go through the service entrance. I went through the massive front doors. The valet, Carlos, scrambled to open the door for me. "Good night, Carlos," he said, straightening up. "Good night, Carlos," I replied. "Keep the change." I handed him a crisp $100 bill. I got into my old, reliable sedan that had seen better days. I sat there for a moment in the quiet. I looked in the rearview mirror. I wiped off the siren red lipstick. Underneath, I looked tired. I looked 55. I looked like a man who had spent a lifetime standing in the back of the room. But in the reflection, I saw something else too. I saw the man who held the pen. I started the engine. The radio came on, a classic rock station. I turned it up. I drove home, leaving the golden lights of the Gala behind me. Table 4 was cleared. The glass was swept up. The bill was paid. And tomorrow I had a company to run.